for inviting me back here. It's great to be back amongst friends. I'm just going to also thank Bernadette for a very interesting paper, very scholarly paper. I think she addresses three questions, and I want to address them as well. How may a president grant a pardon? I'm phrasing it slightly differently than I think she would. What are the consequences of a presidential pardon? And the third question, may Congress grant pardons, and what are their consequences? So how may the president grant a pardon? Well, I don't think Bernadette disagrees, and I don't think any of us would disagree that the president can grant an individualized pardon, right? He can name me as the recipient and say, I get a pardon. But the question is, can he grant them to a group, i.e. grant amnesty? And to say no is not to deny the president the power to grant a bunch of pardons to the group. It's just to require that he write separate forms for each person. So he's just going to get out the Xerox machine, right, and fill in the blanks and issue the pardons. Fortunately, I think that he doesn't need to do that. The Constitution actually allows him to save the trees. He can issue a general pardon, and this is part of our history. The Crown issued general pardons throughout its history. State governors also issued general pardons. The commander-in-chief, who had authority under the Articles of Confederation, George Washington, was granted authority by Congress to issue reprieves and pardons, not authority to issue amnesty, yet he issued general pardons. He would issue general pardons on days of commemoration, like the 4th of July, the anniversary of the Treaty of Alliance with France, etc. And so sometimes it had nothing to do with whether someone was worthy of the pardon. It's just, we have a wonderful day here, it's July 4th, and I'd like to set everybody free. Then, of course, as President Washington famously issued a pardon, a general pardon, to the whiskey rebels in Pennsylvania. Adams did so in the Freeze Rebellion. Madison did so on several occasions, and all the way up to Lincoln, presidents have issued general pardons. So, as far as I can tell, a proclamation of general pardon was not followed by individualized pardons. You could use the proclamation itself as your pardon, plead it in court, I assume, and presumably the executive branch wasn't trying to prosecute people who fit within the confines of the pardon. So I don't know of any case where someone says, I've got this proclamation of pardon, I fit within the description, you shouldn't prosecute me. It's probably because the executive branch didn't bother to prosecute them if they also agreed that the person fit within the boundaries. So I don't know if Bernadette is suggesting the president can't grant a general pardon or amnesty, but I think the history both before the Constitution and after suggests that a general pardon, which is another word for amnesty, was one of the typical attributes of the executive, and of course the Constitution actually grants the president the power to pardon. Where I think we're more in agreement about is about the consequences of an executive pardon. The pardon forgives the offense and blots out the guilt, but it does not typically result in a return of property or funds or any thing that's been forfeited, and it does not wash away attainder. So there were some limits as to what could be done by a pardon, and I'll come back to that in a moment. What about legislative pardons, right? Well, why do we have these acts of oblivion? Well, from my reading, and some of the same material that Bernadette's looked at, originally the Crown went to Parliament to publicize its pardons. And another reason to go to Parliament is that you could actually do more via legislation than you could do via an executive pardon, right? You can get the money or property returned, and you could wipe away the attainder if Parliament so specified, and only Parliament can do that. The Crown couldn't, and so those are two reasons why the Crown would go to Parliament to get the pardon instantiated in an act. Another reason why Crown went to Parliament is that there was a bargain to be struck. The Crown needed funds, Parliament had them, and the Parliament wanted to share the acclaim that came with a pardon, and so the Crown would promise a pardon if it got money for its troops or its officers, and the Parliament would oblige based on what type of pardon the Crown would issue. One benefit of a pardon initially from Parliament was that you didn't have to plead. You didn't have to have an individualized copy. You didn't have to plead the Pardon Act. The court had to take judicial notice of it. Ordinarily, when you're saying you've been pardoned, you've got to produce a pardon that the court can then read to decide whether or not the prosecutor can prosecute. You didn't have to do that if you had an act. So I think I agree with Burnett insofar as she's suggesting that there's some things the president can't do via pardon, whether it's individualized or general, such as take money out from the Treasury, such as removing the effects of attaintment if Congress actually ever passed such a statute that attainted anyone. But I think I might disagree with her insofar as she's suggesting that the president doesn't have a power to issue a general pardon. I don't. There are different consequences between an executive pardon and a legislative pardon, but that doesn't imply that the president can't issue a general one. And then I think the final thing I'd say is, well, why do I think that the Congress can issue pardons? Well, the Continental Congress issued pardons before the Constitution, even though there was no pardon power granted to the Continental Congress. And state legislatures also issued pardons, even though they often didn't have authority in their state constitutions. And that leads me to think that legislatures were thought to have authority to issue pardons. And under our Constitution, I guess that suggests that they could issue a pardon even over the president's objections, because they have the power to pass legislation, notwithstanding the fact that he objects.